Hello and welcome to this week's Politics Today, where we'll be discussing last week's local election and by-election in which Reform won with a political landslide, and we'll be asking, is this the end of the two-party dominance of Labour and the Conservatives, and can Reform win a general election? And this programme today, I'm joined by Pastor Chris Wickland from Living Word Church in Fareham, together with Joshua Bellingham from Conservative Christian Fellowship. So welcome to the programme, guys. It's great to see you back on the programme, Chris. Share with us the exciting news that you feature in this exciting documentary called All His Glory, where you're sharing your powerful testimony of coming out from the occult, finding Jesus, which could be used as a very powerful tool for evangelism.
Yeah, well, firstly, thanks for getting me back on the show again. It's always a pleasure to be here. This film's called Show Me Your Glory. It comes out on the 14th of May and it goes out to every cinema in America. And then in the fall of this year or towards the end of the summer of this year in Britain, it will then be streamed via Amazon and things. And it's basically a film about, I think, 7 or 8 people's testimonies about how God dramatically came into their life, either through suffering or through torment or through turmoil. My story is from witchcraft to Christ. There's another one a lady that went to hell for half an hour, another one that met Jesus in heaven, and various other things. And also there's another powerful story about how a child died of cancer. So it covers the full spectrum of the Christian experience, and it's going to be a great film. I've seen what it looks like already. It looks really, really good. So looking forward to
seeing it. And Josh, it's great to have you back on the programme. So if you give us an update on what you're doing, and I know you have a great passion and heart for the persecuted church, but you're also part of the Conservative Christian Fellowship as well. So give us an update on what you've been up to.
Well, thanks so much for having me on again.
Pleasure.
It's a real pleasure. So in regards to the persecution of Christians, some really interesting news, some great news I think we can all rejoice in is that the group that I've been working with called the Shia Fund, we've managed to get about 40 tons of aid, including food and medicine, to the Christians in Syria who have been escaping from the fall of the Assad regime and the violence which has ensued. There's about 100,000, but probably more, who immediately faced direct persecution and threat to their life. So that's a fantastic thing, and I think we really need to carry on praying for these people. They're out of the headlines. We don't really hear about them very much now, but the struggle is ongoing. And with the CCF, Conservative Christian Fellowship, things are moving forward. We had a great week last week campaigning for Christian candidates. And of course, local elections turned out the way they did. But it was really great to see the building up of the team that we have, which is becoming more mobile and able to strategically support Christians across the country.
Excellent. And Chris, what are your thoughts on the political earthquake that we all witnessed last week, where we really truly saw Reform emerged as the most dominant force in British politics? Not only did they win the local elections with a landslide, I think they took 10 councils, but they also won Runcorn and Helsby By-election, which was a Labour stronghold. I think they overturned a 33,000 majority to win by 6 votes. Share with us your thoughts on this incredible landslide victory of the Reform Party.
I think it's a populist miracle. This is something we haven't seen for about 100 years in British politics. It's really quite exciting to see the typical two-party system, and finally out of literally nowhere, well, I say literally nowhere, but pretty much overnight, that such a tiny little party just gained such huge dominance. And I think it really is quite a telling sign of the mood of our nation and where people are coming from and what they're tired of and what they're fed up with. It was very telling. I think Labour won 150 to 180 seats, I can't quite remember which one it is, and the Tories, they lost 600 seats, and Reform gained 677. It's just an incredible turnaround in our politics. I couldn't believe it. I knew Reform were going to do okay, but when I saw the statistics the next day, I was pretty much fell off my chair. I was like, this is incredible. So yeah, I was amazed.
Absolutely. Josh, I know it's a bad night for the Conservative Party, and it's been quite a miserable time for the Conservative Party ever since they lost the general election last July. But share with us really how Reform as merging such a threat because they proved that they can win in the Conservative heartlands, and now they prove that they can win in Labour heartlands. And so for Labour Party strategists, for Conservative Party strategists, how do they deal with the emergence of Nigel Farage and Reform as now the emergent party in British politics?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's a fascinating point in British political history. We haven't seen this in a very long time. We've had an establishment situation for as far back as we can remember, and really deep strongholds, especially the Conservative Party, had a lot of safe areas, a lot of the machinery of the political engine and the campaigning systems were really rooted in these county areas, these county councils. So the fact that Reform have been able to put a spanner in the wheel and the spokes of the Conservative Party in this way, I think sends a very clear message that it's not simply a protest vote, and that they're a very formidable force when it comes to the future of British politics, and we could very likely be seeing a massive realignment in party allegiances.
Absolutely. And Chris, what do you think the British, or I'd say the English electorate, because I only had the local elections were in England, but share with us your thoughts on what it says about the English electorate. They decided to vote for Reform, and the BBC reports that the Reform leader Nigel Farage said that his party has now replaced the Tories as the main party of opposition after Reform gained the control of 10 councils, won 2 mayoral candidates and gained their 5th Member of Parliament.
Yeah, it's showing the voice of the silent majority, and the silent majority is tired of mainstream politics. We discussed last year about even how the Tories had disenfranchised those who were centre right in their politics because they'd moved so far to the left. So you had Lib Dems were left, Green were left, Labour were left, and Tories were left. And so Reform are really the only ones that stood out from the crowd. Yeah. And so I think that's, again, and I think, the reason why I think the Conservatives suffered so badly this time round is because we're living in days where we need a strong leader. Now, I like Kemi Badenoch and what she stands for, but I just don't think she's got a strong enough voice to turn the tide at this time. And I think that's what people want. They want a strong, aggressive leader, a bit like a Trump in this nation, to come against head on with all the nonsense that's been going on politically. Yeah,
absolutely. And Josh, how have the Conservative Party responded to this, which was a devastating defeat? They lost more than 670 councillors, won just 1 mayoral election, that was in Cambridgeshire. Is this really a reflection of the bad leadership now of Kemi Badenoch, who's having to ask some very, very serious questions? And is the British electorate still looking at the scandal era of broken promises under Boris Johnson, that he promised so much and yet in the end couldn't deliver much? The Conservative Party and government could not deal with the mass illegal immigration, despite Suella Braverman's very strong focal points. And generally, what does the Conservative Party stand for anymore?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing, and in terms of the reasons behind this this result, I think it is very much connected with the backdrop of just distrust and broken promises. It's still very recent, if you think about it. Voters have good memories, and it's still very fresh in people's memories. 2022 was a complete downward spiral of just self-destruction, I think, with the Conservative Party. It just showed, firstly, if you've got a party that doesn't trust its own leader and is constantly changing its leader, it's not very good. And that's it's not helping gaining trust. And then, so that's still fresh. And then with the current leadership, Kemi's found herself in a place which is incredibly complicated, trying to rebuild a party from that and rebuild trust, working through the structures of the party to get it realigned in a way that it can actually win is very hard. So the response that I think we've seen from the Conservative Party and from Kemi herself is one of understanding that this is actually a real discontent, really, that we're seeing, and that the party really needs to listen to that.
Yeah. And Chris, clearly what we're seeing really in the local election results, the by-election result as well, the emergence of reform as a major force now in British politics, probably the main opposition force according to Nigel Farage, is because they are anti-globalist. Like you were saying, that we have the left influence within the Conservative Party, within Labour, within the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party, and that Reform truly are the party of Brexit. They are the ones that are anti-globalist policies, and we know that any political party that adopts the policies of the WEF, follow that globalism ideals and trying to implement them, ends up in an electoral catastrophe. Just look at the Labour Party right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that Labour hasn't done is it's not really addressed the issues of immigration. The Conservatives, they tried to address it, but they just didn't do enough quick enough. And I don't think people really understand the issue with immigration, you know, because it's all labelled with racism and things, is more important than we realise, because we're seeing our nation coming into a place of cultural flux. So while the left is trying to dismantle our culture, they're importing another culture, and it's having a very serious and detrimental effect on our society. And people are seeing it, they're witnessing it. The politicians are not dealing with it because they don't want to, for obvious reasons. But actually, and that's why they're looking to reform. Reform, Nigel Farage has always stood up and said, immigration is always an issue. And he's probably the one that people are looking to get this problem solved.
And Josh, if we consider the issues that the British public or electorate are very concerned about, they are very, very concerned about mass immigration. They're concerned about net zero. They're concerned about the cost of living, freedom of speech, the respecting of our heritage, our history, defending the realm, and protecting our streets, and also very much concerned about the rise of lawlessness. And of course, the older generation are very concerned that this Labour government have taken away their winter fuel allowance after paying taxes into the system all their lives. They feel betrayed, and this has been taken away. Share with us how this is having a huge impact on shaping our politics, which has allowed Reform to emerge as the most dominant force in British politics now.
I mean, really good points. I think we're seeing the age-old principle of never ignore the voter, never ignore the electorate. The customer's always right, the electorate's always right, and the things which are concerning to them have been ignored. And what's happened with the establishment parties is they've just been putting forward time after time a new leader, a new face, but it hasn't really been changing the outcome. And on all of these points that we're talking about, the immigration, the lawlessness, the insecurity, the cost of living, across the whole board, people are just seeing that their country, the country that they love, the country that they live in, is not being governed properly, and you've got a massive distrust in the institutions. And when you have distrust in institutions, that leads to anti-establishment movements like Reform, which is going to come in with a sledgehammer and change things up. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing.
And Chris, I mean, how does Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, respond to this? It was only in July when they won an absolutely historic landslide election, and the last election in July 2024. Not even a year on, it feels like the party's falling apart. And already, I mean, they've just lost one of their key constituencies, which is a Labour stronghold in Runcorn, to Reform. Surely now the emergence of Reform and Nigel Farage is putting the fear in Labour Party strategists, and it seems like the British public consider this current Labour government as probably being the worst government in history.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, when you've got a Prime Minister that can't even tell you what a woman is until the Supreme Court comes out and defines it, I think that's a worrying state of affairs for a leader of a nation. I think let's not forget that although Labour won by a landslide victory, it wasn't the Populist Party that won because everyone was voting for them. They won because actually people punished the Tories, and that's one of the reasons why they got in. So I think they weren't very popular to start with, and their policies that they've come out with, as you've mentioned, you know, the winter fuel allowance, they've just made some ginormous political gaffes which you just can't come back from. And I believe he wants to do a U-turn on that now, possibly. It was in the news today. You just can't come back from where you've gone to. And the people are tired of it. They're tired of this cultural Marxist, politicized stuff where, was it gender politics? People are just so fed up with it now. They want just sensible politics, sensible government. And they see Nigel Farage as one of the few people that can bring that in.
Absolutely. And the big question really in this programme is, if the local elections of last week were a general election, then Nigel Farage would be our Prime Minister, and Reform would form our next government. Just share with us the kind of incredible rise of Reform to be in that position where they effectively are challenging the major two political parties, which is the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, for governance of this nation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what we've seen is that they've got complete control over 10 councils. They've got, I think, 2 mayors now, which is, for an emerging party, that's a very significant part of political territory. So when it comes to, I think when you look at the polling, what the initial polling after the local elections, that did suggest that if we'd had an election, that Reform would be at the top, if not very close, and a very formidable force. The question, I think, still remains as to whether they actually have the capacity to build a real political machine that can put forward credible candidates across the country to replace one of the parties. So that's still up in the air, but we'll have to see whether they can actually deliver in the local areas and do what they say.
Absolutely. And Chris, I suppose the big political question we were asking ourselves, and maybe after last week we know this is probably true now, can Nigel Farage win a general election? Can he be our next Prime Minister? He's already guaranteed his place in British history by securing that very important referendum to pull us out of the European Union. But can he now go one step further and become our next Prime Minister?
I think he can, but only, as Joshua pointed out, that if Reform do well on the ground by running local councils, I think if they do well doing that, then I think he's got a chance, a shot at the top. But I think if they don't do well at doing that, then that's going to cause problems, I think, further down the line.
Absolutely. The title of this programme, could Reform break the dominance that has been dominant over the past century of the two-party system, being the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, the two established parties, and actually break through and show there is actually a third way in British politics, which would then become Reform?
Yeah. I think, our system throughout the last couple of centuries has typically been two parties. There has been a lot of change, and it's quite interesting because if you think back, the Conservative Party merged in the 1830s, evolving out of the Tory Party, and then the Labour Party came out of the Liberal Party, which came out of the Whig Party. And so there's a lot of evolution that's happened in the last 200 years. So now what we have is a super interesting point where there's that third horn emerging, and it's kind of disrupting the status quo. And the question which we'll have to watch and see to see what happens, is which one of the two parties loses out the worst. So will the Conservatives be the contender with Reform, or will Labour be the contender, or will something else completely different happen? But I think we'll probably stay with a two-party system. Yeah. At some point.
And Chris, I have to kind of ask you this question, which is very, very important, is that in the United States, we've seen the Republicans under President Trump honour conservatives, honour religious freedom. But so far, however much Nigel Farage talks about wrapping himself in the Union Jack and defending Great Britain, I don't hear him talking about defending Christian liberties at all. And this seems to be the spiritual component to Reform that was missing, because you can have a political party like Reform push back on all the globalist ideas and policies, which in a sense would be godly, but in a sense, unless there's a spiritual reformation in this country, and the church comes on fire for the Lord again, there is repentance. Unless our society changes, then whatever Reform do in power, they won't be able to do anything much.
No, that's right. And one of the things that we need to remember is that Christianity has defined Western culture, Western values. It's defined our politics. Actually, whether it was old school liberal or old school conservative, you found Christians in both sides of that spectrum. And I think without a good, strong Christian presence in government, I do think we're in trouble. Now, although Reform don't necessarily say are out, very outspoken about Christianity, I know there's a lot of Christians that are involved with Reform. So that's a good thing. But I do think, like what we've seen in America, where a lot of preachers from the pulpits were saying, look, it's either more of the blue party, which was woke liberal craziness, or whether you like Trump or not, but nevertheless you're standing for a party that's going to defend Christianity and Christian values. And I think that's why they saw a massive tidal wave of red across America, which took everybody by surprise. And I think we need to see something similar in this country as well. I can't, forgive me for saying this, and forgive me viewers if you voted Labour, but I can't understand why many Christians voted for Labour. It's like, do you not understand what the policies that they stand for? And so I think in the next general election, Christians really need to think very carefully. It's not just about the candidate, but it's about the party and what they stand for and the value system that they're going to do and bring in as well. And I think that's really important.
No, absolutely. The fact is that Reform is such a young party, and it's clearly going places. And if there's more by-elections, you're pretty much sure that Reform will probably pick up those votes, and so therefore increase their parliamentary representatives, which will give them a bigger voice. But surely it's also a way of Christians who have a passion and interest for politics actually being able to have an influence and shape the party. Because what we've seen, sadly, even with your own party, the Conservative Party, is a complete rejection of biblical values. And anyone who holds to strong biblical values in these parties are politically marginalised.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges with, I think you're right that there's Christians in Reform, and I know quite a few of them, and they're trying to build an alliance in the party to have a stronger voice. In these early stages, I think it will be very telling to see what character it takes on, because I think Reform exemplifies and is part of a bigger question that the country is going through of who are we, what do we believe in, what are our values, and what are our political attitudes. So as we're talking about, the Christianity's a foundation, so that is absolutely fundamental. If Christian voice and the wisdom of God is not able to speak into the solutions, then I think they'll be very limited, and it will probably be to their own detriment.
Yeah. And as a pastor, Chris, just share with us the importance of when it comes to politics. If you exclude Jesus from our parliament, if you exclude him from our legislation, from our media, from our society, then our society wouldn't be blessed. But share with us how, if we put Jesus right forefront and centre with a banner over parliament saying Jesus is Lord, then we can see a spiritual transformation that will see a lot of healing that needs to be done in our society. A lot of political and social rifts would be healed. And people are crying out, really, aren't they, for a real return to biblical moral values and a country that they can believe in that hasn't a clear identity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you get Christians that say, Jesus is Lord of all, but it's like, well, is he Lord of all? Because you get a lot of Christians say, I'm not going to get into politics because it's a dirty thing. And it's like, well, Jesus is Lord of all or isn't. So is he Lord of politics? Is he Lord of education? Is he Lord of media? And for him to do that, he's going to use his body, which is the church, the body of Christ on the earth, to get the job done, which means he needs Christians in parliament, Christians in politics, in education, in media. And so if we want to see Jesus as Lord of all, we're the ones that need to be in there making him Lord of all.
Absolutely. And so what would you say, Josh, to anyone watching this programme that wants to dip their feet in politics and getting involved? And I mean, I think from my understanding of politics, having met a lot, interviewed politicians and ministers and been around the area, politics is one of these jobs or careers where you can so easily sell your soul. You sell your soul, you're finished.
Yeah.
But share with us how we really need men and women of integrity who know the word of God, but are fearful of God rather than man. And I think this is the biggest failure over the last few decades, where prominent evangelical Christians have been in positions of power and influence, and they've had a fear of man rather than of God.
Absolutely. I think It's so important that we understand the difference between being a spectator and being an ambassador of Christ. It's front and center in Scripture that we're ambassadors. And I think something which is often hard to understand, maybe misunderstood or overlooked, is the fact that politics and political authority is ordained by God, and though it's actually closely tied to religion and to the spiritual movement of the country. And there's a great quote from Kierkegaard once. He said that politics and what people imagine as political will one day unmask itself as a religious movement. So Christians need to see that there isn't like this separation, that what's going on there is a direct reflection of what's happening spiritually in the country.
Absolutely. And down to the last minute and a half or so, Chris, could we see, for example, that the Labour Party are following in the same direction as the Democrats by implementing such globalist woke policies that the British people and the British electorate, just like the American electorate, are getting fed up? And that we could see reform emerge in that kind of political vacuum to emerge as the true force and be a party that really does honour Christians and the Christian faith. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And I think people just want some truth, some honesty and some integrity, just good old-fashioned common sense politics. And I think people want to see a lot of the trash taken out. People want to see the grooming gang scandal. They want that public inquiry. There are things that this nation wants. Globalism aside, I think there's a lot of local stuff and national stuff that people want to see put back on the table when it comes to immigration and things like that. So yeah, let's hope that reform can get the job done and get it over the line.
So Chris and Josh, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Day. Done a great job. Thank you for watching this week's Politics Today. And the emergence of reform as a major political powerhouse in British politics is extraordinary. We could see them breaking the dominance of the two-party system, and we could see Nigel Farage in 10 Downing Street. So thank you for watching this week's Politics Today.